The summer sun hung low over the Turner Ranch, stretching shadows long across the dry grasslands. Dust rode the wind, brushing against the wooden fences that had grown old before their time. 12-year-old Elias Turner wiped sweat from his brow as he trudged through the field, pretending to be busy with chores he had no desire to finish. His father's harsh voice still echoed in his ears. Orders barked, warnings repeated, expectations piled on his shoulders like sacks of grain. But none of it mattered today, because he saw something the ranch couldn't offer: freedom. Beyond the back pasture, beyond the ridge of cedar trees, lay the land he was forbidden to set foot on. Apache land, his father had said in a tone mixed with fear and pride. Not a place for you. Not ever. His father always spoke of the Apache as if they were storms, unpredictable, dangerous, better watched from a distance. Elias had always obeyed. Until now, his heart thudded with the thrill of disobedience as he stepped past the fence, squeezing through a loose board he had found weeks ago. A single glance over his shoulder confirmed the house was quiet, his father occupied in the barn, his mother resting. Exhausted from another day of trying to keep peace between husband and son, so Elias walked. The cedar ridge loomed ahead, whispering stories through its branches. Every step felt like diving deeper into a world he wasn't meant to see, but longed for all the same. He'd heard tales, some from townsfolk, some he invented himself, about the Apache who lived beyond the ridge. Warriors who moved like shadows, trackers who could read a man's path by the way grass bent, men who were feared and admired in equal breath. But Elias didn't imagine he would stumble into anything. He was wrong. When he reached the ridge's crest, the land changed. The air seemed heavier, quieter, as if the world held its breath. The trees here were thicker, their branches twisting like old hands reaching toward the sky. A narrow game trail ran along the slope. Elias followed it, curiosity pulling him forward stronger than any sense of caution. He didn't see the rattlesnake until it was too late. A sharp rattle split the silence. Elias froze, his blood turning to ice. The snake coiled at his feet, inches from striking. He swallowed hard, unable to move, unable to scream. But before fear could swallow him whole, he felt it, a presence. Slow, steady, like a shadow that had always been there. Elias turned his head, heartbeat hammering in his ears, and saw him. An Apache warrior stood no more than 7 steps away. Tall, broad-shouldered, completely motionless. His long black hair was tied back with leather, his chest marked with paint Elias didn't understand. A bow hung across his back, but his hands were empty, resting calmly at his sides. His face was unreadable, not cruel, not angry. Simply watching. And those eyes, dark, deep, and ancient, held Elias in place more tightly than fear ever could. The boy couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He had never been so close to an Apache before, and certainly never expected to live long enough to tell the story. But the warrior didn't raise a weapon. He didn't step forward. He simply looked at the rattlesnake, then back at Elias, a silent message. One the boy understood. Slowly, very slowly, the warrior lifted his hand just a fraction and made the smallest gesture. A tilt of his chin, a flick of his fingers. Move backward. Now, Elias obeyed without thinking, inching back with trembling legs. The snake hissed, then slithered away into the brush. Only then did Elias suck in a breath, his chest expanding painfully with relief. When he looked up again, the warrior hadn't moved. The man's stillness was more powerful than any threat. It wasn't the stillness of someone lying in wait. It was the calm of someone who expected respect without asking for it. Elias opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The warrior raised a single eyebrow, as if to say, "Now you understand." Understand what? Elias couldn't put it into words, but he felt it, the line he had crossed, the danger he had walked into, and the mercy he'd just been given. Without speaking, the warrior turned his head toward the distant ridge, the one that led home. He didn't gesture again. He didn't need to. Elias understood, shaking, humbled and more alive than he had ever felt. Elias stepped back onto the trail. Apache warrior watched him the whole time, silent, still, a protector he hadn't known he had found, and as Elias finally reached the ridge, he dared to look back. The warrior was gone. As if he had been part of the land all along, the memory of that day lived inside Elias Turner like a secret he carried close to his ribs. Years later, he would still wake at night thinking of the warrior's dark eyes steady, unmoving, calm as a sleeping mountain. But on the day it happened, Elias was too stunned to understand anything except that he had been spared. He stood trembling on the trail, staring at the spot where the rattlesnake had disappeared. The sound of its tail still rang in his ears like a warning bell. His heart thudded so loudly he felt sure the Apache warrior could hear it. When Elias forced himself to look up, the man was still there, motionless, silent, watching Dot up close. He looked older than Elias first thought, perhaps 20, perhaps 25, but there was an agelessness in him that made it impossible to tell. His skin held the warm bronze of sun and wind, his cheekbones sharp as flint, his gaze neither welcoming nor hostile, just aware. Dot. It was the awareness that frightened Elias most. The warrior seemed to see straight through him to the fear in his bones, the boy beneath the bravado, the curiosity that had led him here. Elias had always felt invisible on the ranch, overshadowed by his father's loud presence, ignored when he tried to speak. But here, under the cedar trees, a man who owed him nothing saw him entirely. The warrior shifted his weight barely. A subtle change, the kind only a tracker or someone terrified might notice. He tilted his chin toward the slope behind Elias, the same direction he had indicated moments ago. Go. Home. Now, the silent command pressed harder than any shouted order his father had ever given. Elias swallowed hard, his throat dry as desert grass. Thank you, he whispered, though he wasn't sure why. The warrior didn't react. His face remained unreadable, eyes steady as winter nights. Elias took one step backward, careful not to stumble. Then another. The warrior watched every movement, not blinking. When Elias finally turned to leave, he half expected the man to follow. Instead, the forest swallowed the warrior's presence as quickly as it had revealed it. Elias looked over his shoulder a dozen times on the long walk back across the ridge, each time finding only shadows and wind, but he didn't feel alone. Not really. It was as if the warrior's gaze remained with him, guiding each cautious step until he reached the edge of Turnerland. Elias didn't tell his father what had happened. He tried, he truly did, but the words stuck like thorns in his throat. His father would be furious. He'd storm into Apache land with a rifle, shouting threats, stirring trouble where none was needed. The memory of the calm warrior deserved better than to be twisted into a campfire tale about savages and danger. Besides, Elias didn't want to share the moment with anyone. In his mind, it didn't feel like danger. It felt like protection. That night, as Elias lay in bed listening to the restless wind scrape against the windows, he replayed every fragment of the encounter. The snake's rattle, the warrior's stillness, the simple, wordless gesture that had saved him. Why? The question echoed in his mind. Why had the warrior spared him? Why had he warned him? From everything Elias had heard in town, the Apache didn't show mercy to trespassers. They defended their land fiercely, some said violently. But nothing about the man Elias saw matched those stories. His eyes had held no hatred, only awareness. Perhaps curiosity. and something Elias couldn't name, yet a quietness that felt more powerful than any weapon. He drifted into uneasy sleep, and in his dreams he found the warrior again, standing where the cedar ridge touched the sky, a silent figure between worlds, watching him with that same unreadable calm. Over the next few days, Elias felt the pull of the ridge stronger than ever. Something inside him wanted to return, not out of defiance or thrill-seeking, but out of a strange, deep intuition he didn't understand. The warrior had appeared at the exact moment Elias needed him, like a guardian placed there by the land itself, but he didn't go back. Not yet. Instead, he found himself scanning the horizon whenever he fed the horses or hauled water, hoping to catch even the faintest glimpse of someone watching from a distance. He never did. Still, he felt it, a presence lingering at the borders of his life. A watchful silence in the trees. A promise he could not name. He didn't know the warrior's name. He didn't know his tribe. He didn't know why he cared so much. But deep in his heart, Elias sensed this was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning. Years passed, and the Turner Ranch had become Elias's world. The small cabin, the weathered fences, and the endless stretch of prairie were all he knew and all he could protect. He had grown from a small, timid boy who had trembled before the Apache warrior into a young man of 19, lean, strong, and careful. But the past had a way of lingering, and danger often appeared in forms no man could predict. This summer was different. The crops had failed again, the creek running lower than ever, and the debt collector's letters arrived with increasing urgency. Elias's father, once a man of commanding presence, had become bitter and gaunt. His mother, worn down by years of worry, barely left the kitchen, her eyes hollow with fatigue. Every night, Elias lay awake listening to the wind scrape against the roof, feeling the weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders like a sack of stones. And then the arrows appeared. They weren't the kind meant to strike. Elias recognized the pattern immediately, a series of small, precise arrows planted in the fence posts along the ridge line, tipped with paint and feathers arranged in an unmistakable symbol. A warning, not a threat, but the meaning was clear. Someone had been watching the ranch. Elias's father, too proud and stubborn to admit fear, saw only danger and insisted the arrows were the work of mischievous boys or wandering bandits. "Stay away from the ridge," he barked. "No good comes from that land. It's cursed, just like its people." Elias, however, remembered the calm eyes of the Apache warrior who had spared him years ago. The image was so vivid it almost ached in his chest. He could still see the silent figure, still feel the quiet power of someone who commanded respect without speaking. That memory and instinct told him that the arrows were not random, and that the answer lay beyond the cedar ridge. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Elias made his decision. He gathered his gear, a slung rifle, a coiled rope, and a small satchel with bread and dried meat. He didn't tell his father where he was going. His father would have stopped him, scolding and threatening, or worse. Elias slipped quietly through the cabin door, heart pounding, and moved toward the ridge that had haunted his thoughts since childhood. The cedar trees loomed, their twisted branches casting long shadows in the dimming light. Elias's pulse quickened as he climbed the familiar slope. Every step brought him closer to the unknown. Yet he felt a strange comfort, as if the land itself recognized him and would guide him. And then he saw him. The warrior was waiting. Elias froze, breath-catching. It was as if time had folded over itself. The tall, imposing figure of the Apache stood among the cedars, calm and steady as the years had passed. His presence radiated authority, yet there was no trace of hostility. The wind tugged at his hair, but he did not flinch. He simply watched, as he had once watched a boy tremble before him. Elias lowered his rifle. knowing instinctively he did not need it. This was no enemy. He felt, deep in his bones, that this warrior Koda, though Elias did not yet know his name, would protect, guide, and test him in ways he could not yet understand. The warrior made no move to greet him. He didn't speak. He simply shifted his stance, a subtle tilt that said, "You've returned." "Do you understand why?" Elias swallowed hard and nodded. He could not speak the words aloud. They were too heavy. Instead, he followed Kata down a narrow path into the heart of the cedar grove, feeling the weight of years and memory pressing upon him. The past, the present, and the danger now converged in silence. Somewhere in the shadows, Elias realized a storm was gathering, and only the presence of this silent, powerful warrior could guide him through it. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope that the ranch might survive, that his family might endure, and that the boy who had once wandered too far would finally stand with someone who understood him completely. Elias had spent countless nights haunted by the memory of Koda, the Apache warrior who had saved him as a boy. The ridges and cedars of his childhood had become both a sanctuary and a question mark, an unknown world that whispered his name whenever he thought of courage or fear. Now, with arrows marking his family's land and uncertainty pressing against every wall of the Turner Ranch, Elias knew he had no choice. He had to find the warrior again. He moved quietly across the ridge at dawn, the air crisp and fragrant with cedar sap and wildflowers. His heart thumped with the mix of fear and anticipation that had accompanied him years ago, only now tempered by the knowledge that he was no longer a child. He had learned the land, learned to read the sky, and track the patterns of wind and wildlife. And yet, approaching the cedars felt like stepping into a sacred hall, where every shadow could conceal judgment or protection. Hours passed before he finally saw him, as if the forest itself had been holding its breath. Koda stood at the edge of a clearing, tall and still, his silhouette outlined by the early sun. Time had not diminished the warrior's presence. If anything, it had intensified it. His movements were deliberate, measured, and Elias felt that familiar quiet power radiating from him, the same force that had commanded a boy's respect years ago. For a moment, Elias hesitated. He had expected a confrontation, a test, perhaps even anger for crossing boundaries. But Koda simply watched, allowing Elias to approach at his own pace. Every step seemed laden with meaning, every inch traveled a lesson in patience. Elias understood, instinctively, that this warrior did not rush decisions or judge hastily. His silence was a mirror reflecting intent, respect, and unspoken truth. I need your help," Elias finally said, voice breaking in the hush of the cedars. "There are arrows. Someone's watching my ranch. I don't know who, and I don't know what to do." Koda's expression remained unreadable. He did not nod, did not speak, but his eyes softened ever so slightly, acknowledging the weight of Elias's words. Then, with a single gesture, a subtle sweep of his arm toward the ridge, and then back toward the forest, he invited Elias to follow. The path was narrow and winding, the air thick with the scent of earth and pine. Elias struggled to match Koda's pace at first, but the warrior slowed without looking back, allowing him to catch up. No words were spoken. There was no need. Elias felt the same guidance he had as a boy, now stronger and more deliberate. It was as if Koda had been waiting for this moment, preparing silently for the boy he had once spared to become a man capable of walking alongside him. As they walked, Koda finally broke the silence, his voice low, calm, and deliberate. "The arrows were not meant to harm. They are a warning, a sign of unrest on land near your home. You should not have ignored it, but you came anyway. That shows courage." Elias swallowed. He knew better than to question the warrior, but the sound of Koda's voice made the years of memory feel alive again. I remembered you," he admitted. "When I saw the arrows, I knew I had to come. I didn't know who else I could trust." Koda's gaze pierced through him, steady and commanding. "Trust is earned, not given lightly," he said. "But you have walked through fear and returned. That is the beginning." The statement, though simple, carried weight. Elias felt it resonate through his entire being. The boy he had been, the trembling child, had returned. And now he stood on the cusp of understanding, ready to learn the ways of survival, caution, and alliance. The bond between them, formed silently in the past, was now tangible, stretching like a bridge over years of uncertainty. By the time they reached the heart of the cedar grove, Elias had begun to sense that there was more to the arrows than mere warning. Koda moved with purpose, as if guiding him not just through the forest, but into a deeper understanding of the world, its dangers, its loyalties, and its fragile balance between trust and violence. Elias realized something then. A truth he hadn't fully comprehended as a child. This warrior had never truly left him. Koda had remained in the background of his life, a silent protector, waiting for the day Elias would be ready to see the full measure of his presence and purpose. And now, standing side by side in the shadowed grove, Elias understood that the journey ahead into danger, truth, and perhaps destiny would be walked together. The ridge wind whispered around them, carrying both warning and promise. Elias met Koda's eyes, and for the first time, he understood that some guardians do not shout or strike. They wait, they watch, and they teach through presence alone. He had come for guidance. He had found much more. Elias followed Koda deeper into the cedar grove, the morning light filtering through twisted branches and illuminating patches of earth and moss. The warrior moved with a quiet certainty, each step deliberate, like a man who had walked these lands for a lifetime. Elias's heart raced, but not with fear. It was anticipation, the kind that made the blood thrumming through his veins feel alive, alert, ready for what was to come. Finally, they stopped at a high clearing overlooking the far stretch of prairie. From this vantage point, Elias could see the Turner Ranch in the distance, the wooden fences weathered and leaning, the small barn just barely standing against the winds of the season. And then he noticed something that made his stomach tighten, a faint movement near the creek, shadows flitting too quickly for them to be animals, and scattered signs of recent travel, broken branches, disturbed earth, the unmistakable pattern of calculated watchfulness. Koda remained still, his gaze tracking the land. Then, in a voice that was calm but heavy with authority, he spoke. "These are not my people. They do not belong to my tribe." Elias felt a chill. "Not your people? But the arrows?" Koda nodded slowly. "The arrows were warning you. My tribe would never harm your family. But these, others are different. Rogue bandits. They move fast, strike without mercy, and seek to provoke conflict between your people and mine. They hope to weaken both." Elias's chest tightened as he realized the gravity of the situation. This was no simple warning. This was preparation for an attack, a raid meant to destroy and intimidate. And without Koda's guidance, he had no chance of defending his family alone. "Why? Why would you help me?" Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He had spent years remembering the day Koda had saved him, but the answer had never been clear. Now it demanded explanation. The warrior's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with a memory Elias could feel like a weight pressing against him. "Because of her," Koda said simply. Elias frowned, confused. "Her?" Koda's gaze shifted to the horizon, distant and somber. "Your mother. Many years ago, she found me, wounded and alone. You were not yet born. She saved my life when no one else would, treated my wounds, gave me water, and hope. That day, she became part of my story, and I became part of hers. Elias staggered back mentally, the pieces falling into place with the dizzying clarity of fate. His mother's kindness, the gentle hands that had tended scraped knees and bruises, the soft voice that had comforted him in childhood had reached farther than he had ever imagined. It had reached across the borderlands, across cultures, across fear and history, to touch the life of this powerful warrior. "I didn't know," Elias whispered. Koda inclined his head, acknowledging the boy-turned-man he had once spared. "I have watched over you in ways you could not understand. That is why you have returned and why I am here now. We are bound by more than choice. By blood, perhaps, or by honor. Either way, I will not let harm come to your family while I can prevent it." Elias felt a surge of gratitude and awe. The fear and awe he had felt as a boy, the trembling, paralyzed feeling of standing before Koda, was now transformed into something stronger: trust. Not blind trust, but a bond forged through years of memory, courage, and circumstance. "We must act," Koda said, his voice low, steady, commanding. "The bandits are patient, but we are swifter. You have grown since I last saw you, Elias. You can help me. You will learn quickly." Elias nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and resolve. For the first time, he understood the full measure of what had been waiting for him beyond the ridge, the danger. The loyalty, the opportunity to stand beside someone who understood the land, the threats, and the human heart in ways he never could alone. Koda extended his hand toward the distant shadows near the creek. "We begin with observation. Then we strike. And remember, control your fear. Fear is a weapon for them, but discipline is ours." Elias clenched his fists and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him like a mantle. He was no longer the boy who had wandered recklessly past the ridge. He was a young man standing on the edge of battle, side by side with the warrior who had shaped his life, ready to defend the land, his family, and the honor of those who had saved him long before he could understand the cost. The prairie stretched before them, wide, unforgiving, and alive with danger. And Elias felt for the first time that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The sun had barely risen when Elias and Koda moved silently through the cedar grove, the morning mist curling around their boots like smoke. Every step was deliberate, each snapped twig or shifted stone calculated. Elias had learned quickly that in Koda's presence, nothing was random. Every movement mattered, every sound told a story. He had followed him as a boy, trembling and uncertain, but now he matched the warrior's pace, muscles taut, senses sharp. Koda glanced back briefly, his dark eyes assessing, measuring. "You have grown, Elias," he said, voice calm, but layered with approval. "You will need this. Courage alone will not save your home." Elias swallowed, his mouth dry, but nodded. "I understand. I want to learn." The warrior's lips curved slightly, the faintest acknowledgement of respect. "Good. Then listen, watch, trust, but confirm. The bandits are clever, but they are not invisible. We move as one, always as one." They skirted the edges of the prairie, shadows among the tall grass, moving closer to where Koda had spotted signs of the rogue bandits. Elias noticed the subtle cues that Koda did not announce: a flattened patch of grass where a horse had rested, a faint scuff on the soil, a twig broken at knee-height. Each signal was a thread in the story Koda was weaving, and Elias followed intently, piecing together the unseen movements of men who meant to do harm. By midday, they had established a vantage point atop a low rise. From here, Elias could see the creek that nourished the Turner Ranch, the fences, and beyond them the distant, moving shadows of the bandits. Koda's posture was relaxed but lethal, like a panther waiting in tall grass. "They underestimate you," Koda said quietly, almost to himself. "They think you are alone." Elias's jaw tightened. "They'll regret it." Koda's eyes flicked to him, sharp. "Do not let anger blind you. Focus, always." That is the difference between survival and destruction. Hours passed in near silence. Koda demonstrated the art of patience, showing Elias how to read the land, the wind, and the behavior of men. He taught him how to move with intention, how to anticipate, and how to think 2 steps ahead. Elias's confidence grew, tempered by caution. He realized he was no longer the boy who had blindly wandered into the cedars. He was a participant, a partner in an alliance forged in trust and necessity. As the sun dipped low, painting the prairie gold and crimson, Koda finally spoke with a tone Elias had not heard before, a low rumble, deliberate and instructive. "We strike not with haste, but with precision. Wait for the moment. They will make mistakes. Patience will save you more than boldness." Elias nodded. He could feel the weight of Koda's words settle in his chest like armor. For the first time, he understood that courage without discipline was reckless, and discipline without courage was impotent. Together, they had both. Night fell, and the prairie became a shadowed, whispering world. Elias and Koda set up a small camp in the cedar grove, remaining concealed in the darkness. Elias tended the small fire, careful not to let its glow betray their position, while Koda kept watch, a silent sentinel. There was no need for conversation. Their trust had been built in the quiet moments, in shared observation and understanding. Elias finally broke the silence. "I never imagined that I'd be here, learning from you, preparing to defend my home. I thought I was too small, too weak." Koda's gaze softened, the faintest glint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Small and weak you were once. Now you have learned what I could teach. You have courage, patience, and an understanding of this land. That is enough. You are ready." The young man felt a warmth he could not name. Pride, yes, but deeper than that, a bond that transcended words. Koda had not only saved him as a boy, he had returned now to make him capable of facing what lay ahead. Their alliance was no longer tentative. It was cemented by shared experience, trust, and the unspoken knowledge that they were stronger together than apart. As the wind whispered through the cedars, Elias realized the truth. He had found not just a protector, but a partner, a teacher, and a friend. The rogue bandits had underestimated the pair, not knowing that the Turner boy had grown, and that the warrior who had once spared him now stood as his mentor, guide, and shield. The prairie before them was wide, dangerous, and alive with threats, but Elias felt ready. He was no longer a boy wandering into the unknown. He was part of a force forged in dust, courage, and trust, a young man and an Apache warrior bound together to face the coming storm, and together they would not fail. The first light of dawn broke across the prairie, painting the land in pale gold and soft violet. The air was cool, carrying the scent of cedar, grass, and distant smoke. Elias crouched low beside Koda, heart hammering, rifle steady in his hands. For months he had trained under the warrior's guidance, learning to read the land, anticipate movement, and control his fear. Yet now, standing at the edge of battle, he felt a tension unlike anything he had known. Koda's presence beside him was calm, unwavering, as if he could absorb every threat with a glance. Elias remembered the boy he had once been, the trembling, terrified child who had wandered past the ridge and marveled at the transformation. He was no longer alone. He had the warrior at his side, and together they had become a force to be reckoned with. The rogue bandits moved closer, their shadows flickering across the grass. They had been patient, testing, probing the boundaries of the Turner Ranch. But now Koda had chosen the moment, and Elias could see the trap taking shape, a narrow path between two ridges, perfect for an ambush. "Stay low." "Wait for my signal," Coda whispered, his voice a smooth, lethal calm. "They will make the first mistake." Elias nodded, muscles taut, senses alert. Every leaf, every gust of wind, every distant bird call felt amplified. The bandits were confident, careless even, unaware of the eyes watching them from the cedars. Coda had taught him well. Patience, observation, and timing were weapons just as sharp as any blade or rifle. The first mistake came swiftly. A lone bandit stepped onto a sunlit patch, unaware of the concealed pair above him. Coda's hand flicked and Elias fired, careful, precise. The shot rang out, echoing across the prairie. The bandit dropped and chaos erupted. Coda moved like a shadow, silent and unstoppable. He disarmed and incapacitated with effortless skill, each movement deliberate and controlled. Elias followed, heart racing, mind focused. He worked with Coda, anticipating the next move, covering angles, guiding the young man's instincts with silent gestures and subtle signals. The battle was over in what felt like moments but stretched into an eternity. The rogue bandits, disoriented and terrified, fled across the prairie, leaving behind their weapons, their pride, and their plans. Coda's warriors, who had been hidden along the tree lines, joined the pursuit, ensuring none returned to threaten the Turner Ranch again. When the dust settled, Elias sank to the ground, exhausted but exhilarated. His body ached, his hands shook, but a sense of triumph and relief washed over him. He looked at Coda, who stood tall, surveying the land with the same calm authority that had first captured Elias's awe years ago. "You did well," Coda said finally, voice quiet but firm. "You did not hesitate. You followed. You protected. You learned quickly." Elias swallowed hard, pride and humility warring within him. I couldn't have done it without you," he admitted. "You taught me everything I know." Coda's gaze softened, the faintest acknowledgement of respect in his dark eyes. "No," he said. "You taught yourself. I only guided. The courage, patience, and discipline you have now, those are yours. Remember that." Elias nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. The boy who had once trembled before a silent warrior had now stood as an equal, defending his family, his home, and the land he loved. The Turner Ranch was safe, not because of one man or one warrior, but because they had fought together, trust and skill intertwined like the roots of the cedars around them dot as the sun climbed higher, the prairie stretching endlessly before them. Elias felt a new understanding settle in his chest. Coda had once been a silent protector, guiding a frightened boy. Now they stood side by side as partners, equals, and allies. Their bond was forged in danger, trust, and shared purpose. The air was still, carrying only the faint rustle of grass and the distant cries of birds returning to the treetops. Elias exhaled slowly, letting the adrenaline ebb. The danger had passed for now, but the lessons, the bond, and the courage would remain forever. Coda placed a hand on Elias's shoulder, solid and grounding. "The world beyond the ridge is full of challenges," he said. "But you are ready. You have grown, and you will continue to grow. Remember what you have learned today." Elias met the warrior's eyes, seeing not only his mentor but a friend, a protector, and a symbol of all he could aspire to be. The boy who had wandered too far, trembling at the edge of danger, was gone. In his place stood a young man, ready to face the world with strength, courage, and the silent guidance of an Apache warrior who had shaped his destiny. Together, they watched the prairie, the wind whispering through the cedars. The battle was won, but the bond forged in dust shadow, and trust would endure far beyond the ridge, carrying lessons, loyalty, and courage into every step that lay ahead. The prairie was quiet in the early morning after the battle, the first rays of sun spilling gold across the tall grasses. Elias and Coda stood side by side on the ridge, surveying the land below, the Turner Ranch safe, the rogue bandits gone, and the vast wilderness stretching endlessly into the horizon. The wind whispered through the cedars, carrying a sense of peace that had been hard. Elias felt the weight of the moment pressing in. He had come here as a boy, trembling and small, unprepared for the power and danger of the land. He had wandered too far and had been spared by a silent, motionless warrior. Years later, he had returned, no longer a child, guided by instinct, courage, and a bond he did not fully understand until now. "You saved me," Elias said quietly, turning to Coda. "Back then. You could have done anything. You could have nothing. And yet you stood there, letting me understand something I didn't even know I needed to know." Coda's dark eyes softened, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his lips. "I did not save you, Elias. I protected you. And you saved yourself, even then. You made the choice to live, to learn, to return. I only guided what was already within you." Elias swallowed, feeling a mix of gratitude, awe, and humility. "And now? What happens now?" Coda's gaze drifted toward the Turner Ranch, where his people had begun to mingle with the Turner family, repairing fences and sharing supplies. "Now," you continue, "you protect your home, your family, your land. And you remember the lessons of patience, courage, and trust. That is what endures beyond the battles and the fear." The young man nodded, understanding that the bond they shared was not just forged in the heat of conflict, but in years of silent observation, guidance, and mutual respect. He looked out across the prairie, imagining all the lives touched by this quiet alliance: his own family, Coda's people, the neighboring ranches, and even the land itself, resilient and enduring under their care. Coda stepped closer, resting a firm hand on Elias's shoulder. "The world beyond this ridge is full of uncertainty, but alliances true ones carry strength. You have earned that strength. Remember it always." Elias met his gaze, feeling a surge of emotion he could not name. Pride, yes, but also a deep sense of belonging. He had come to understand the warrior's silence, his presence, and the quiet lessons of respect and patience. The boy who had trembled at the edge of danger had become a man who could stand firm beside one of the strongest warriors he had ever known. In the weeks that followed, peace settled over the Turner Ranch and the surrounding lands. The Apache tribe, guided by Coda's wisdom, and the Turner family began forming an unlikely but lasting alliance. They shared knowledge, defended one another, and learned to coexist, bridging the gap between cultures once divided by fear and misunderstanding. Elias found himself walking the ridge often, side by side with Coda, the man who had first appeared as a silent guardian and had remained, years later, as a mentor, friend, and protector. Together, they patrolled the land, repaired fences, taught each other the subtleties of survival and respect, and strengthened the fragile peace that now bound them all. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, Elias stopped and looked at Coda. "I never imagined I'd come this far, that the ridge would bring me more than danger, that it would bring me guidance and loyalty and something I didn't know I needed." Coda's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "The land teaches those who listen," he said. "The ridge, the cedars, the wind, all of it speaks. You listened, Elias. That is why you are here. That is why we are here." Elias felt a quiet certainty settle over him. The ridge was no longer just a place of fear or curiosity. It was a symbol of trust, of courage, and of the bond between a boy who had wandered too far and the Apache warrior who had remained motionless, letting him understand the prairie stretched endlessly before them, golden and untamed, carrying the whispers of the past and the promise of the future. And in that moment, Elias understood. Some bonds do more than protect, they change the course of lives, families, and even the land itself. The boy who had once trembled at the edge of danger was gone. In his place stood a man forged by trust, courage, and guidance, a man who had learned that strength is found not only in battle but in loyalty, understanding, and the silent presence of those who truly watch over you. Coda remained by his side, as he had so many years before, silent, steady, and enduring. Together, they faced the horizon, knowing that the ridge, the prairie, and the land itself would never forget the bond they had forged, and neither would they.